Welcome to Crossing the Atlantic. I'm Christina Robofe-Broaddus, your host. And if you've been listening to this podcast when it was called The Transatlantic Entrepreneur, well, this is the same show. It's the same me, but it's a different language, and we've broadened the name to match the full range of business leaders making the transatlantic crossing today. And if you're new here, welcome. You're in the right place. So, last month, I was sitting across from a VP of business development at a mid-market American SaaS company. Smart guy, good product, solid team, and he just spent 14 months and close to $400,000 trying to break into France. And when I asked him what happened, because clearly something had happened, they'd had 2 paying customers after over a year, he said something that I've heard so many times now that I could have guessed almost word for word what he was going to say. He said, well, we thought we understood. Everybody speaks English. We assumed we could go in and do business like we've always done with what's always worked at home. That sentence, that's the sentence that I want to talk about today because it is the most expensive assumption in the transatlantic business world. And I hear some version of it from companies on both sides. Americans heading into Europe and Europeans heading into the US. Different accents, different languages, same blind spot. And here's what they've done. They'd basically taken their U.S. expansion playbook, the one that works when you're entering a new region or a new vertical, and they applied it to France. They hired a local sales rep. They translated their website. They adjusted their pricing for euros and cost of living, all of that. And then they started their outreach. And I mean, all of that sounds logical and it all looks very reasonable, but it's the wrong way of going about it. And it's not wrong because there's anything inherently wrong about that. It's not like there was a single step that was bad, but it's just because the entire approach was built on an assumption that they'd never really thought to question. That doing business in France is basically like doing business in the US, maybe just with more vacation and better food. Now, I call this the familiarity trap. And I want to explain why it's the single most dangerous dynamic in transatlantic business. When a company expands to a country like Japan or China or India or somewhere in the Middle East, they prepare for it. They budget for cultural consultants. They study the etiquette, the business culture, the way things are done, how to approach a client, and they go in expecting a steep learning curve. And because they expect difficulty and they expect it to be different, they invest upfront in understanding how things work because they don't want to make mistakes. But when a company crosses the Atlantic, very often there's none of that. And I mean, it's often because we generally share a language. I mean, business is generally done in English. It may not be everyone's native language, but it's generally the language that we communicate in. We're all there on LinkedIn. We're probably all using the same software, Salesforce, Zoom, all of that. Maybe we go to a lot of the same conferences. We watch the same Netflix shows. We follow the same business gurus. And there's just kind of this built-in feeling that, hey, it's not so different. And that the differences are maybe surface level. Just, adjust the language, adjust the pricing, find a local hire, and then you're good to go. And that feeling, that false sense of familiarity is exactly where companies lose money. Let me give you 2 examples of what the familiarity trap looks like when it's actually happening. Story number 1, a French CEO who runs a mid-sized industrial company. It's a good product, really strong reputation in Europe. Well, he flies to New York for a round of sales meetings. The meetings seemingly go well. The American prospects are enthusiastic, typical stuff. This is great. We love it. Yeah, let's definitely keep talking. And the French CEO flies home, tells his board that the U.S. pipeline is heating up. He's excited and he starts planning the next steps. But 3 months later, Those prospects, they've gone completely silent. There's no responses to the emails. There's no returned calls. And the CEO is confused, frustrated even. And he tells me, yeah, I don't know. They said they were interested. What happened? Well, what happened is that, we love it, let's keep talking, doesn't mean the same thing in American English as it does in French business culture. In France, generally, if a business contact tells you they're interested, they probably are. The French don't waste words on empty enthusiasm. But in the US, that kind of warmth is kind of like a social currency. It's how Americans are polite. It's how they keep options open. An American saying this is great after a first meeting is, I don't know, it's almost like just a greeting. It's just saying like, I acknowledge that you exist and I'm not going to be rude about the fact that I'm not totally convinced by what you're trying to sell me. And the French CEO didn't misunderstand the words. He misunderstood, he understood every word perfectly. What he misunderstood was the culture that those words were operating inside. Now, let's flip it around. Story number 2. This is an American company this time. It's a tech sector. It's growing fast, and they hire a country manager in Germany to start selling into the DACH region. They get into meetings with German prospects, and these prospects start asking detailed technical questions. They push back on pricing. They request documentation, references, certifications, and the American team reads all of this as resistance. I don't know. They're not buying. Let's just move on to some warmer leads. Except in German business culture, that is buying behavior. Detailed questioning is how German companies evaluate whether they can trust you. Pushing back on pricing is the beginning of a negotiation. It's not the end of one. And asking for documentation means that they're doing their due diligence, which means they're taking you seriously. But the American team walked away from prospects who were actively in the process of moving closer to a purchase. Now, in both cases, we're working in the same language. English was the language of business here. It's the same professional setting, but completely different operating systems running underneath. And that's the image that I keep coming back to. It's like, imagine 2 computers sitting side by side. They both have the same keyboard, same screen, same icons. You'd assume that they work the same way, but one is running Windows and the other is running Mac iOS. And if you try to use the keyboard shortcuts from one on the other, well, things just kind of break down and it doesn't work. And it's not because either system is wrong. They're both perfectly functional. You're just pressing the wrong keys for the system that you're operating in. And that's what's happening in transatlantic business meetings every single day. Now, you might be thinking, okay, Christina, but everyone knows there are cultural differences. And yeah, sure. At a high level, everyone nods and says, yes, of course, the Americans are maybe more straight to the point. The French take longer lunches. The Germans are more formal. Everybody knows these stereotypes. But knowing the stereotypes isn't the same as understanding how those differences play out in a procurement process or in a negotiation or in the 12 months after you've signed your first hire. The stereotypes are, they're what they are. They're stereotypes. They're like tourist level knowledge and often, not always true. But what costs you money is the stuff that operates below the level of conscious awareness, the stuff that you don't even know you're assuming. This is the stuff that you don't know you don't know. And the data backs this up. Research consistently shows that 70% of international business ventures fail because of cultural misunderstandings, not product failures, not bad market sizing, but misread cultural signals. Cross-border M&A deals fail at rates between 70 and 90%. And the EACC, the European American Chamber of Commerce, put out their transatlantic expansion barometer. It's a survey of 200 U.S. and European mid-sized businesses, and culture alignment comes up as the number one challenge every single time. And all of this between two economies that traded $1.5 trillion in goods and services in 2024 alone. So if the gap were as small as most executives and most teams assume, that number would be a lot lower. So what do you do about it exactly? All right. Now, I'm not going to give you like a 10-step framework. That's not what this podcast is all about, but I will share 5 questions that I ask every company that I work with right at the start. And I call this the cultural operating system diagnostic. It takes about 15 minutes, but it can save you months of wasted effort and wasted money because it shows you exactly where your assumptions are most likely to bite you. Question number 1. How are decisions actually made? In most American companies, if a senior leader says yes, the deal moves. In many European companies, especially French and German ones, a yes from one person doesn't mean the organization has committed. Decisions go through consensus. There are multiple layers. And if you're American and you think you've got buy-in because the VP shook your hand, you might be surprised when the deal stalls for 3 months while 4 other departments weigh in. Question number 2. What does trust look like here? Americans tend to build trust through competence. Show me results, deliver on time, and I'll trust you. A lot of European business culture builds trust through relationships over time. I need to know you as a person, not just a vendor. In France, they even have the expression, I need to feel you. I need to kind of feel you out before I'm going to bet my company's reputation on you. And if you're selling like an American in a relationship trust culture, you'll feel like you're running into a wall. And if you're a European selling in the US and you're trying to build a personal relationship, have multiple meetings before really getting down to the nitty-gritty details of doing business, the American is thinking, oh my goodness, when are we going to talk about the deal and get to the concrete stuff? Question number 3, what does fast mean? An American sales cycle for a mid-market B2B deal might be anywhere from 3 to 6 months. The same deal in France or Germany might take anywhere from, 8 to maybe even up to 16 months. I've had deals where the discussions have stretched out over 24 months and it wasn't even that big of a deal. But in both of these cases, neither speed is wrong. But if you're running your European pipeline against American velocity benchmarks, you will kill promising deals by pushing too hard, too fast. And if you're European and you're approaching the American market at your normal pace, you might lose out to a competitor who moved quicker while you were still building up that relationship. Question number 4. What does direct mean? Americans think that they're being clear. Europeans, especially British and the French, often find American directness a little aggressive. Meanwhile, Europeans think that they're being diplomatic and nuanced, and Americans often find them evasive or unclear. Neither side intends to miscommunicate, but if you can't adjust your directness style depending on who you're talking to, you're going to create friction without understanding why. Now, one little nuance here on this point is that, of course, in Europe, there are many different cultures and there are many different ways of dealing with directness. The Dutch are, very, very direct. Whereas, like I said, the French tend to be a little bit more in the nuance and the diplomatic approach, and you have to read between the lines. So if you're working in one specific country, I would recommend that you really read up on the culture of directness for that country. All right, question number 5, and this is the one that saves the most money. What does no sound like? In American business culture, no is, sometimes it's either explicit, we're going in a different direction. Fine, clear. And in French business culture, no frequently sounds like, yeah, we need to think about it. Let's, call me back in 3 months and let's revisit this. In British business culture, that's a very interesting idea can mean it's absolutely not very interesting. And if you can't hear the no in someone else's cultural language, you may waste months chasing deals that were dead on arrival. Now, You don't need to become a cultural anthropologist to cross the Atlantic. That's kind of what I'm here for, is to help you figure these things out. But you do need to know where your blind spots are before you spend 6 or 7 figures discovering them the hard way. Let's go back a little bit to that SaaS VP that I mentioned earlier in this episode. So we went back through his 14 months and we found 7 specific moments where cultural misalignment had quietly derailed their momentum. The hiring process, the follow-up cadence, the pricing presentation, the way they ran meetings. And none of this was about language. None of it was about the product itself. Every single point of failure was an assumption that felt so natural, so obvious that nobody thought to question it. And that's the thing about the familiarity trap. It doesn't feel like a trap. It feels like common sense. It feels like, of course, this is how it works. This is how it's always worked, until you're 14 months and $400,000 in, and you're sitting across from someone like me trying to figure out where it all went sideways. The companies that succeeded across the Atlantic, and I've seen plenty that do, they aren't the ones with the biggest budgets or necessarily the best products. They're the ones that start with a different question. Not how do we enter this market, but what are we assuming about this market that we haven't tested and that we haven't validated? That's the question I want to leave with you today. I invite you to take a little bit of time and just kind of sit with it and be honest with yourself, because the answer is probably more uncomfortable than you think. Like I said, we're working with the stuff that you don't know that you don't know. And sometimes when we dig in and we start finding those things out, well, it's not always easy to accept. And which is why I want to invite you to just kind of sit with this, because that discomfort is worth a lot more than confidence built on assumptions. Thanks for listening to this episode. And if even one thing from this episode shifts the way that you're thinking about your transatlantic expansion, that's exactly why I do this. This has been Crossing the Atlantic, and I'll see you in 2 weeks when we dig into the numbers, what actually happens when those assumptions go unchecked, and the specific blind spots that drain the most money in year 1.